Hi, my name is Claudia Farnsworth, and today I will be presenting on student engagement in Indigenous Australian youth from the perspective of an educational and developmental psychologist. What is the current issue? It is well documented that Indigenous students in Australia perform poorly on all educational outcomes when compared to non-Indigenous Australians. As education is important for future life successes and opportunities, it is a major concern for future generations of Indigenous Australians. The Closing the Gap Report 2018 found that in 2017, the overall attendance rate for Indigenous and students was 83.2% compared to 93% for non-Indigenous Australians. Further to this, 65.3% of Indigenous Australians completed Year 12 compared to 89% of non-Indigenous Australians. These statistics illustrate the need for educational and psychological interventions to help close the gap. So why is student engagement important? For the purpose of this presentation, I'll be focusing on student engagement. Student engagement incorporates behavioural, emotional, and cognitive dimensions. This involves participation in school activities, positive and negative relationships with teachers and peers, and a willingness to learn and develop skills. Engagement is important as it predicts quality learning and success in school. It is also malleable and thus can be promoted and developed from a young schooling age through direct interventions. Research findings also suggest that Indigenous Australians are at a greater risk of disengaging than non-Indigenous Australian students. So I'm taking a role of an educational and developmental psychologist today. So what do they do? According to the Australian Psychological Society, educational and development psychologists work with individuals across the lifespan with issues relating to development and education. They assess and diagnose developmental issues and design, implement, and evaluate training and developmental programs. Educational and developmental psychologists also consult with groups and organisations such as schools. So what are the origins and etiology of this problem? Firstly, it is very complex. It is complex and multifactorial. Research has been conducted looking at the role of racism, socioeconomic factors, beliefs and values, and discrimination. However, due to the wealth and strength of the research focusing on the role of the self-concept in school engagement and academic achievement, this will be the primary focus of this presentation. There are other factors that need to be considered when addressing this issue, and thus some will be addressed which have been incorporated into the self-concept research. So what exactly is a self-concept? Research indicates that self-concepts are domain-specific constructs and refer to one's perceptions of themselves due to individual interactions with the environment and other people. The domain specificity suggests that there is a school or academic self-concept which predicts school engagement and achievements. Therefore, Jung, Craven and Ali 2013 defined the academic self-concept as an individual's self-perceptions of their academic work, and thus these perceptions can therefore influence academic behaviours, such as engagement and academic success. Research is therefore focused on comparing the academic self-concept of Indigenous Australian and non-Indigenous Australian youth. Consistent findings from research suggest a positive link between academic self-concepts and engagement and achievement in school. Importantly, Craven and Maggs in 2014 found that there were no differences in the meaning between Indigenous and non-Indigenous academic self-concepts, and that the main measure to assess academic self-concept is cross-culturally suitable. This, therefore, is assuring as the findings can be attributed to the real differences rather than cross-cultural biases. Bodkin, Andrews, Rourke and Craven 2010 found Year 7 to 10 Indigenous students reported lower self-concepts when compared to non-Indigenous students. This finding was further replicated by Jung, Craven and Ali, focusing on students in Years 3 to 6. Similarly, Mooney, Seaton, Kaur, Marsh and Young 2016 found small differences in the academic self-concepts of Year 3 to 6 students. However, interestingly, cultural differences were also found, as Indigenous students reported higher scores on the cultural scales and endorsed promoting Aboriginal culture in schools more than non-Indigenous students. These findings combined suggest a strong role that the academic self-concept can play in educational settings and the importance of culture. All three studies use the same measure to address the academic self-concept, the self-description questionnaire, However, they were all cross-cultural in nature, and thus causation cannot be inferred. One promising research project that can provide the foundation for the design of future programs is the Seeding Success in Aboriginal Australian Primary School Research project. The focus was on primary schools in New South Wales, and it was a mixed method study, longitudinal in design. The research focused on 5 critical factors, as can be seen in this diagram: the teacher, classroom climate, cultural and Aboriginal education, teaching strategies, and the academic self-concepts. Importantly, it incorporated qualitative interviews with teachers, Aboriginal education officers, and students to gain an understanding of some of the existing strategies that are being used in schools today. The key quantitative findings suggested the importance of a positive academic self-concept, culturally inclusive teaching practices, and a positive classroom environment. The qualitative findings provided a deeper understanding of what was important for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth. Some of the findings included targeted support for Indigenous students, the development of a strong cultural community relationship, and promoting an understanding that Indigenous students are learners and thus can achieve. So what does this all mean? The findings above suggested the importance of promoting an academic self-concept for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous students can boost engagement in school. The lower academic self-concepts are a concern for the Indigenous students, and thus this may be influenced by cultural differences. It suggests that individual students do not have a good estimate of their abilities in the academic sense, and thus it is vital that schools, teachers, and psychologists boost their feelings of competence in this area. So what can I do as an educational and developmental psychologist? As a quick reminder, educational and developmental psychologists work with people across the lifespan focusing on educational and developmental issues. They work with individuals or consult groups focusing on assessment, diagnosis, and designing and implementing of programs. Before assisting in promoting student engagement in Indigenous youth, I would need to ensure that I am culturally competent. This would require research into the culture, beliefs, and values of this population, and also ensure that throughout my research and practice, I consult with the Indigenous community. Importantly, I cannot treat the Indigenous youth as a homogeneous population, and thus I need to be aware that what works for one school may not work for another, or may not work for every child in that school, and thus this needs to be emphasised throughout my research and practice. It is recognised that in the literature currently there is a limited focus on specific strategies to promote student engagement in the Indigenous youth. Current research provides suggestions or recommendations, but these have not been used to design, implement, and critically evaluate programs. This, therefore, can be one of my roles as an educational and developmental psychologist. I can conduct further research to assist in the educational development of Indigenous youth. This research could start by focusing on the case studies provided in the Seeding Success research project to critically evaluate the strategies that they used in their schools. If the research indicates that these strategies are effective, from there I can then consult with schools who do not have any strategies in place to promote student engagement, and they use the recommendations provided by the research to design programs. It therefore means that my main priority, however, is research, in evaluating the effectiveness of these strategies and then consulting with schools throughout Australia to try and promote student engagement. As part of my clinical practice, I can assess at-risk kids that have been identified in schools and work with them individually and in consultation with the schools. I can assist the students in identifying the main areas of concern, promoting a positive academic self-concept, and helping to implement both personal and school strategies to promote student engagement. The exact strategies that would be beneficial are unclear, and thus I would need to do research as just previously discussed. However, emerging research by Craven et al. 2016 has focused on the role of positive psychology in addressing Indigenous issues, as it aligns with the Indigenous worldview. Working with Indigenous students on their strengths and values may boost their academic self-concept and thus promote engagement. However, further research in this area is needed. Thank you.